Welcome, dear listeners, to the realm where fear reigns supreme, and the darkness holds its sway. I am your guide through this labyrinth of nightmares, your companion in the shadows. In this podcast, I will read you stories that I'm sure will keep you up at night. And I hope by the end of this episode, you will not be able to close your eyes without a chill running up your spine. Episode 5, Part 2 of The Infected Town. I've been losing time. This is my third attempt at typing this out. I'll sit down at the desk to start writing, and suddenly it's 3 hours later and I'm on the porch finishing a pack of cigarettes. When I go to the computer, a blank Word document is staring at me. But it's not only when I'm trying to write. The first blackout I can remember happened shortly after we came back from our drive through the town. Since then, they come at least 2 or 3 times a day. I walk into a new room and suddenly realize I can't remember what I've been doing for the past half hour. I'll complain of being hungry, and suddenly we're sitting in front of the TV, eating pizza. I'll be in the shower, and suddenly I'm in bed with the lights out. Blake and Heather don't feel odd, and they say I act totally normal during the times I can't remember. Blake won't let me quarantine myself in my room, as I know I should. He also stubbornly refuses to take Heather and get back to San Francisco. He says there's a good chance they're already infected too, and he won't risk spreading it. He also won't leave me. I know it's selfish, but I'm grateful. He and Heather keep arguing about it. She stormed out a couple minutes ago to take a walk, because he won't give an inch. Too bad she didn't drive herself. She hadn't wanted to pay for gas. I promised myself I'd take you through this chronologically. The memory loss makes it impossible to promise I won't leave anything out. We didn't go into town the next day. I am, still traumatized after seeing that creature. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to go back. But I also didn't want to leave yet. The laptop from Hillside Apartments was wrapped in a plastic bag and ignored on the counter. I drank most of the day away. Heather and Blake argued on and off about leaving. Please, babe, let's just go. Leave her here. It's not even our problem. But Blake is my best friend. He was mine before she ever came along. He'd never leave me, and he let her know it. He's also as curious as I am to what's going on. Around 3 p.m. that day, I got a text from the Oregon number. It said, "Hello, beautiful. So happy you've decided to stay. I'm throwing a little party in your honor. We can't wait to see you." I deleted it shortly after writing it down. He. Again. Who is he? The morning of the 19th, I woke up feeling braver after about 3 hours of sleep. I kept thinking of that text from the Chicago number about the high school and the promise of answers. I had to go back. I'm pretty sure I'm infected. And if that's the case, then leaving is not an option. My only chance is to figure out what's going on. Maybe I can stop this. Somehow. Even if it means burning the town to the ground. Maybe there's a cure. Or a source. Or something. Heather didn't come with Blake and I when we headed into town that day. She's scared and furious with me for getting them into this. She's scared. I don't blame her. I feel really guilty about it. They knew everything I knew when they agreed to come, but I was the one who unearthed something that should have remained buried. We'd seen the high school on our drive that first night, and it wasn't hard to find it again. It's a tall, gray building with red double doors, the sidewalk lined with trees. Very picturesque. The sign out front said Charles Hadwell High School. I'd thought the apartment building had been tough to get into, but this one was locked up tighter than a drum, a stark contrast to the houses on the very same block with their doors wide open. The front entrance was heavily chained and padlocked, We decided the crowbar would be a last-ditch effort here. The chain was so tight around the handles we doubted we'd be able to get leverage to break it in any case. First we circled the perimeter and found 3 more all metal, all locked tight. All the moldy windows on the first story had bars over them. There was, however, a fire escape, and the windows on the upper floor weren't barred. Conveniently enough, the ladder was already lowered to the ground, ready to use. We climbed through an unlocked window on the 3rd floor. Again, we were wearing respirators, gloves, long sleeves, and beanies, though I doubt it mattered anymore. The room we fell into was dim and old-fashioned. The building had probably been built in the 60s and had not been updated since. The walls were dark green, trimmed with wood, and the floor was a beige tile. Mold populated every corner. The level of decay was comparable to the police station. We moved into the hallway. Some of the lockers along the walls were open, contents spilling from them, papers and books and binders. We passed classroom after classroom, slowly realizing we had no idea what we were looking for. The school was full of documents, and many of the chalkboards or projects had writing on them. The school was a big place, and we didn't know where these alleged answers would be. It could take days to look through everything, but we started out searching pretty thoroughly. In the 4th room we entered, I noticed a classic chalkboard in one corner with some kind of chart drawn on it. I checked it out while Blake started rummaging around the teacher's desk by the wall. There was a desktop computer there, but there was no power to the building. Blake found a syllabus for a journalism class on the desk, a stack of school newspapers dated September 2013. So there was my proof that this town had been up and running recently. The student body was collectively termed the Hadwell High Acolytes, weird for a mascot, but I went to a high school where our team name was the Crusaders, and that's kind of a similar thing. The school crest in the upper corner bore the motto, Dona Totum Implate Orbium. I looked it up when I got back to the motel. It means, until it fills the whole world. The chart on the chalkboard turned out to be a list of valedictorians since 1964, with dates and GPAs. Must have been for an article. I noticed that many of the students had the surname Hadwell. Seems a legacy went a long way in this town. That, or fit the family-bred geniuses. The last Hadwell on the list had graduated in 2007. First name Elizabeth. We decided to head downstairs to the offices, see if they held anything conspicuous. The classrooms had yielded nothing that seemed important on first glance. It was far darker on the first floor than those above, and it felt more cramped, like the walls were closing in. Upon rounding a corner, Blake put his hand on my arm and stopped me, telling me to listen. I heard what he did. Faint music, as though from a distant source. I strained, but couldn't make out if there were words or what the tune was. It drifted eerily down the hall. We followed it. It was loudest when we entered a classroom near the front entrance, but still sounded muffled, as though it was coming through the walls. I identified the tune, though it was a bit slower than I was used to. It's a really well-known song, You Are My Sunshine. It played on repeat as we searched the room. As soon as it was over, it started again. It didn't take long to spot a metal trapdoor in the corner of the classroom, looking out of place. I can't resist this trapdoor. It took the crowbar and Blake's biceps to pop it out of the ground, but once it was open, the music was louder. It echoed out of the black hole in the ground, and I felt like we were getting close to something. We had to go down. I didn't want to, but we had to. The answers we were looking for were down there. I got out my crowbar, and Blake palmed his annihilator, which is a solid demolition tool that could do some serious damage. Thus armed, we started down the steep concrete steps into the darkness. The staircase seemed impossibly long. I kept looking back to the shrinking square of light shining through the trapdoor behind us. It soon disappeared into the pressing blackness, and still we descended. The air grew colder around us. The walls pressed in. It felt like we were on that staircase for at least 15 minutes, but my phone told me it was only 3 or 4. You Are My Sunshine just kept on playing, growing louder. On my next step, my foot hit the ground too soon, and I lurched. Blake knocked into me, sending my flashlight flailing down the tunnel we'd just entered. The light flashed wildly in all directions as it clattered to the ground and rolled a good 15 feet away. I watched it come to rest near the wall and sit there for a moment. The beam pointing towards Blake and I. Then it flicked off. I told myself it had broken in the fall. The tunnel we'd entered was carved out of raw rock. It was narrow and low enough that Blake had to stoop slightly. We moved forward, looking for my light but unable to find it. When we finally stumbled on it, it was 50 feet ahead, far further than it had been when I'd seen it stop rolling. It was totally disassembled, more appropriately, torn apart. Lens cracked, coils ripped out and stretched, bulbs smashed. I was down a light source, and it seemed there was something else in the tunnel with us. Gripping our weapons, we crept forward in silence. I wanted to find the source of the music, if only to destroy it. If I never hear that song again, it will be too soon. Quite suddenly, a door melted out of the darkness ahead of us, curved into the shape of the tunnel. It was made of heavy black metal. Etched into the center was the school's crest, the classic shield with a bunch of symbols. I can't remember the specifics of any of them, but I recognize it from the school paper. The door was unlocked. Things are crazy here. Blake is in the hospital, quarantined and injured. Heather and I are holed up in the hotel. I don't know what else to do. I'm so sorry I got anyone into this. It's all I can do to keep posting here to tell you what's going on. I have a feeling whatever this is doesn't want its secrets public knowledge. So at least it feels like I'm doing something to fight it. I'm losing hope. A lot has happened since the last post, but as always, we'll keep it chronological. The door in the tunnel opened into a small chamber, an intimate space but finely decorated. The stone walls were carved with intricate symbols, like none I've ever seen before. Ruins, maybe, but I don't think they're Norse. I can't describe them. They made my head hurt. Tapestries hung on 3-4 walls between stone pillars, each depicting a different scene from what I assume was the same story. The one on the left showed an androgynous person with long hair, sitting on the ground, head in his or her hands in despair. Behind the person stood a thin, solid black figure with no features, hand on his or her shoulders. It would have looked like a comforting guardian or angel if it wasn't so unnerving. At the bottom was the word electum, in those fancy medieval-style letters. Latin, again? The second tapestry, across the chamber from the door, depicted that same innocuous person, only she was split vertically down the middle. The other half was replaced with the shadow figure, 2 halves to a whole. The hybrid creature had its arms outstretched, tendrils of darkness spiraling from the hands. Seemingly holy light shined down on it from above. The caption here was Luctum. The last tapestry was to the right. It showed a crowd of people from behind, all on their knees, bowing to the black figure. The figure in the background was much larger than any of its worshippers in the foreground, and again the heavenly light beamed down on it. That word was Alatum. The gist of the last tapestry was easy to discern. The spread of the sickness, the masses on their knees, Donec totum implit orbim, until it fills the whole world. The other 2 weren't so clear. Who was this person in despair? Did the half-person, half-shadow creature imply taking someone over, or was it a partnership? Was this something that had already come to pass, or more of a prophecy? No way to tell at the time. Blake didn't even pause to look at the pictures. As soon as the door was open, he strode over to the record player in the corner that was blasting You Are My Sunshine. With one rough motion, he shoved the entire thing off the side table it sat on and let it smash against the floor. The song cut out with the scream of the needle against vinyl. Blake stared at it for a second, then brought a heavy, steel-toed boot down on the player. Wood and metal crunched beneath his foot. He picked up the record from the rubble, a 1939 single of You Are My Sunshine by the Pine Ridge Boys, and snapped it neatly in half. I nodded. I was sick of it too. Other than the tapestries and the record player, the chamber only held a podium. 2 lit white candles stood on either side of a black leather-bound book. Notice anything weird about this place? Blake asked. I almost laughed, but I was too stressed out. Other than the fact that it's inner sanctum of some kind of fucking cult? And the fucking candles are lit. There's no mold down here, he said. Not in the tunnel either. I hadn't noticed that. I wonder what it meant. The leather cover of the book we found on the podium is branded with the Hadwell family crest. The same one all over the school and on the door to this chamber. Inside, the yellowed pages are set with dense type. They smell musty, with a hint of cigar smoke. It's a short book, only 138 pages. The writing style is flowery, akin to a Bible. I think that's what it is. This cult's book of scripture. I took it with us when we left. At that point I figured, as I had with the laptop, that we were fucked anyway. No point in leaving behind something important. We couldn't stay long, as it turned out, but I'll tell you about our escape next time. Right now I think you need some answers. I think you've been waiting long enough, and I think I've put enough clues together. I think I figured out what happened and why. Not that it helps anything. I spent a few days reading that Bible. Perhaps Book of Prophecy is a more accurate term. The story of the universe told in this book was very, very different from Christian creation myth and other biblical stories. The story goes that at the beginning of time, when the universe was an empty void, the old gods awoke. Countless gods, nearly infinite in numbers, all of them able to bend the very fabric of the cosmos. Over the eons, with the vast darkness of space and time stretching out before them, they became bored, and that, to these powerful beings, was unacceptable. To alleviate this boredom, each god created its own dimension, where it designed and dictated every natural law. Due to the jealous nature of these beings, soon these dimensions became closely guarded by their particular creators, to avoid their brethren stealing their secrets. Alliances were formed and rivalries were introduced. Walls between dimensions became thicker and thicker between enemies. Between friends, they dwindled down to nothing, and in their cycles of creation and destruction, the gods were content. Of course, one of these gods created our world. His is a story you're probably familiar with. It's been passed down through many religions around the globe, including, but not limited to, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. You know God with a capital G. But what all of the stories fail to tell you is that he's apparently really fickle and bores easily. We weren't quite interesting enough for him. God abandoned us a long time ago. That's one of the reasons the cult hates him so much. According to the Hadwell Bible, God with a capital G had a brother, who is referred to as the entity, and given the sexless pronoun it with a capital I. God and the entity had hated each other since time immemorial. The walls between their dimensions were as thick as any, but the entity knew that God didn't deserve such a beautiful world as he had created. And when he abandoned his people, the entity grew angry. It decided to save us. It made a hole in the wall between dimensions and slithered through into ours. It planned to spread its influence to all of God's abandoned children. Here's how the book describes the paradise it would bring. And they that accept the holy gift shall be ascended, and they shall have life eternal. And they shall no longer victims of fear, nor doubt, nor hatred, nor pain. And they shall be held close to their loving entity, and they shall be one with it and with each other forever and ever. But God had foreseen this trespassing. He'd set cowardly traps before he fled. God is often referred to as a coward with a capital C in the Hadwell Bible. When the entity came into our world, it found itself weakened. Our dimension is hostile to it. It knew it would need a host or a partner, someone from this world with whom it could share its strength to do its holy work. At this point, to me, the entity sounds a lot like a parasite. But for some reason, the cult seems to think being chosen is some sort of honor. The vague promise of life eternal and ascension are enough to make them want it. There are no details as to what it entails, so they assume it's a good thing. I think we've seen enough of this so-called process of ascension to know it's not. And so the entity bided its time in the cracks of our dimension, waiting for the right vessel to come along. The final section of the book is a detailed prophecy that mirrors the story told by the tapestries on the wall. A vessel will be chosen by the entity, where it will incubate and grow stronger. The vessel and the entity are called two in one, but I'm not sure if that means they're both conscious and working together, or if the entity completely controls the vessel. When it is strong enough, the entity will spread its influence across the globe. The people will ascend into paradise, becoming one with the entity for all eternity. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me. And from the twisted forms of the infected people and their hideous smiles, it doesn't look like eternal paradise. It looks like eternal torment. The entity is clearly manipulative. It's probably not even a god. I hope the cult came to regret their decision to facilitate this creature's rebirth into our world, because they did facilitate it. The book describes various rituals and prayers that supposedly help it enter a vessel. I think the vessel in question was born 25 years ago and has been active ever since. There was a birth certificate folded in place in the back of the Hadwell Bible. The cult leader's daughter, Elizabeth Hadwell, born 1989 in Portland. Someone has written on the back of it, "We have been waiting. All hail the coming of the entity. Rejoice." Heather and I took your advice. We went outside trying to find some sunlight. She was especially enthusiastic about it, saying how smart you all were to suggest this. In my opinion, though, it didn't help. It was overcast, but the light burned my eyes nonetheless, and afterwards I just felt exhausted. Heather said she felt rejuvenated, though, so maybe there is something to it. We've made a point to go outside for a couple hours every day. At least every day we're lucid. Time lost for both of us, in increasingly longer chunks. It's hard to type, too. My fingers don't feel as nimble as they used to be. So if there are any spelling errors, I apologize. Blake is back from the hospital, floating on painkillers and antibiotics. We made him as comfortable as we can in the motel room. We've also made sure no one comes into our room to clean anything. Not that those services have been offered. It's a rundown, no-star motel with no business besides us. But the fact is I haven't seen the receptionist since we checked in. No one is ever behind the desk in the lobby. Is the service that bad, or did something happen? I'm not sure if that's something else to be guilty about. As for why Blake was in the hospital, I'll get to it. Chronological, remember? For now, let's go back to that secret room in the school's sub-basement. I didn't get a chance to read any of the Hadwell Bible when we were down in that chamber. Almost as soon as I grabbed it, Blake and I heard shuffling in the tunnel behind us, like someone walking with a pronounced limp. It pierced through the darkness, and for a long, silent moment Blake and I peered intently into the tunnel, unable to see jack shit. Then the door to the chamber slammed shut, sealing us inside. I jumped away from the door so quickly that I knocked into the podium and sent it clattering to the ground, extinguishing the candles. Blake fumbled for his flashlight, while I clutched the leather book tightly, not wanting to lose what turned out to be such an important document. I'd known it was significant as soon as I'd set eyes on it. Blake was pushing at the door, pounding his fist into it so hard I'm surprised the wood didn't splinter. But it was solid and locked firmly from the outside. I peered through the dense darkness around me, panicking, sure that I was currently standing inside my tomb. With a furious curse, Blake spun around and grabbed me, bringing me close. Huddled together, we felt safer. Something was scratching at the wood of the door. I heard a muffled snickering, almost like hissing. The thing was laughing at us. I'm not sure how long we huddled in the darkness, listening to the thing behind the door scratch and giggle. We sat near the fallen podium, Blake swinging his light around at every noise. Scratching and shuffling seemed to come from every direction, like we were being approached on all sides. But we saw nothing. At one point I closed my eyes and put my head between my legs when I felt the urge to vomit. Blake and his flashlight moved away for a while, and I drifted into scattered thoughts, oscillating between resigned calm in the face of my demise and flashes of panic. Hours seemed to pass. Then Blake's hand was on my shoulder, and he was dragging me to my feet, saying he'd found a way out. He led me to the center tapestry behind the toppled podium and ripped it from the wall, his light revealing a hole in the stone there, just large enough for us to crawl through. I sobbed in relief and quickly followed him into the tunnel beyond. Neither of us cared where it would take us. We just wanted to get out of that fucking room. The tunnel we entered was earthen and sloped upward at an increasing angle. We crawled as fast as we could, but before we were out of earshot of that room, we heard the heavy wooden door slam open again. Blake pushing me ahead of him, desperately whispering, "Go, go, go!" And I felt hysteria mounting as I heard the creature's dragging, skittering footprints echo through the chamber. It was following us. At some point, the dirt beneath our hands and knees turned to rough stone, and the tunnel widened until we could almost stand up as long as we kept our backs bent. The creature behind us had made its way into the tunnel, scratching and scuffling at the dirt. Its ragged breath filled the passage. I could hear every clumsy movement, every awful catch of its breath and throat. I hated that. I couldn't see it, or even pause to direct the light on it to look. It was when I had turned, craning to catch a glimpse of whatever was scrambling after us, that I hit a dead end. The wall had risen up ahead, abrupt and impenetrable, and I spent a long, hysterical moment clinging to Blake, listening to the monster come closer and closer. Then Blake shouted something at me, pushed me towards the wall, and picked me up by my hips. "Grab on!" He demanded, and I flailed my arms blindly before my hands caught the metal bars set into the wall. A ladder. The bottom rung was about 5 feet above the ground, about level with the top of my head. But once I climbed a few rungs, Blake easily hoisted himself up. Adrenaline or simple brute strength, I didn't know. Nor did it matter. We heard the creature right below us, still swallowed in the darkness. It gibbered insanely. Just noises and wild grunts. Blake told me later that he felt its hand catch the hem of his jeans, but when he kicked at his foot hadn't connected with anything. The ladder led to a heavy trapdoor that I'm sure, had I not been buzzing with adrenaline, I'd never have been able to push open. As it was, though, I got it open and crawled through it, collapsing onto cobblestone. Blake followed me and slammed the trapdoor closed, settling his entire weight on top of it. Breathing heavily, we looked around. We were outside, next to the school building, on a covered walkway that led down to the locked maintenance door that we tried to open earlier. By some strange jump of time, the sky was darkening, a bloated moon rising behind us. A feeling of relief washed over me, and I caught Blake's eyes. We hesitantly started laughing, in the way of those who have just come out of danger into relative safety. No fucking shit, that's what the fuck he just did. Though soon the laughter took on a hysterical note. Blake rolled around on top of the trapdoor, and I clutched my stomach, back against the wall. Somehow I was still holding the Hadwell Bible, and that only made me laugh harder. Then a thump came from under Blake. A fist on the underside of the metal hatch. We sobered quickly. Resolving to get away from there, gathering our backpacks, we hurried out of the walkway, jumping over the old caution tape that had been strung up at the entrance. A light rain was falling, and I felt a distinct sense of freedom and freshness. I'd been so optimistic then that the book in my hands would change things. That we'd been chased, Girl, why can't I read simple words? I think it's just sentences. Just put big spaces between the words. I'll be good. That we'd been chased because we'd found something that could be our enemy's undoing. I'd be wrong. The answers inside, as you know, are not solutions to our problems. But at the time, I felt I'd already won. Like that had been our last standoff. I decided to linger a bit and took out my phone to take some pictures of the building. Blake took out his camera and snapped along. His actually came out. I think it's because we weren't very close to the mold. Mine don't show much. Blake was snapping some pictures of the walkway while I went around the side of the building to take pictures of the fire escape we'd climbed. He didn't say anything at the time, but I guess he was distracted by the same sounds of shuffling from the direction of the tunnel. He said he watched as something came into view, keeping to the shadows low to the ground, avoiding the industrial lights along the walkway. He took picture after picture as it stood up, looked at him for a long moment, standing in the light of the moon, then climbed over the guardrails and disappeared into a small hole set high into the wall. Back into the school, I was furious that he hadn't turned tail and run as soon as he seen it. But he said it was moving so slow and jerkily, he felt sure he could outrun it. After snapping the last one, he made me get in the car. We arrived back at the motel where Heather was waiting tensely. We'd been gone far longer than we intended. I logged onto my email and found a message from the address at notsaying@gorillamail.com. I'm familiar with Gorilla Mail. I used it all the time in high school to sign up for sites I never wanted junk mail from. They give you random addresses that are temporary and disposable. So I could have said the email then. The person who'd sent me the message did not want a response. Here it is. Claire, you probably won't believe me, but it's worth a shot. I was good friends with Alan and Elizabeth. You probably won't believe me, but it's worth a shot. I was good friends with Alan, and Elizabeth can go fuck herself. I've read all the posts about the mold. Like Alan, I didn't buy it. Unlike Alan, I'm not an idiot. He was one of my best friends, but he was always naive. I'm an atheist, but if God showed up on my doorstep tomorrow and told me to bow down, I wouldn't spend the next few weeks hedging my bets. That's why I bought a gun, and learned to use it. Don't kid yourself. This can't be cured. This thing needs people to possess. It needs bodies. By my reasoning, and bodies don't work with holes in them. None of this following me around watching me shit you pulled on Alan and Jess. I don't want to give the wrong idea about me. I'm not some badass who does this for a living. I was never very strong, and I'd never fought in a fight before this. I was a computer science major and worked in IT. Know what, though? Coding isn't much good when Cthulhu turns out to be real. The good news for me and you, Claire, is that being smart and careful is worth a lot more than being strong. Just remember that others can read what you write. People you might not want knowing all the information. So be careful. But I want to ask you to post this email as soon as you can, because I want Elizabeth to know that I know. I'm speaking to you directly now, Liz. I'm glad you posted again. I know you control both accounts, and I know how much you love fucking with innocent people for your own sick chuckles. I want you to know I'm coming for you, you bitch. I know you started this, and there's a special place in hell for betrayers. You'd like them to think you got caught up in all of this by accident, but that's bullshit. You're no victim. You're the catalyst, the vessel. Even before I moved to Illinois, when I was living in that town surrounded by you and your followers, I made no secret of disliking you. It was a point of contention, because Alan and Jess loved you. They loved you, and you betrayed them as soon as you had it in your power. And I will find you, and I will destroy you for it, Elizabeth Hadwell, for everything you've done to my friends in that town and these new innocents. Now back to you, Claire. I'm sorry you're here. You sound like a nice girl, but this is one of those things you don't get to walk away from. I tried. It doesn't work. You seem on the ball. Just keep your head down and be careful. And don't try to help anyone who seems fucked, because they probably are. Don't listen to Z either. There's no cure for this stuff. You read how that worked out for Alan. My advice, get a gas mask for when you're exploring. Do these people a favor and don't share the town's location like they asked. I lost track of everyone months ago, unfortunately. And your findings are my best lead. That laptop you found, I want to see it. I think it's Liz's. It might tell us more about how to destroy her. She was always secretive and jealous with it, but I think I can get past the lock screen. Can we meet up? Bring your group if that makes you feel safer. I'm not here to hurt you. I know promises aren't worth much, but I promise you that. I want to help. Text me. That Chicago number in your cell, that's me. Let me know when we can meet. We can help each other. I know more about this town than I want to, and you have the laptop. Please. I don't know how to prove I'm trustworthy, so I won't try, but what do either of us have to lose at this point? Talk to you soon, hopefully. The Voyager. I got this email 2 weeks ago, but didn't post it before now, not knowing how long it would take me just to write out the accounts. Spoilers, we met with Clayton. That's the Voyager's real name, and I regret it, but maybe not for the reason you think. This cult is dangerous and Willie, and we need all the help we can get, but I'm not finished trying to fix this. Elizabeth Hadwell is the key, we all agree. The one Alan and Jess described as their best friend is the one in cahoots with the entity. She betrayed them and got them killed, and now she's after everyone she can get her hands on. Stopping her may stop this. Claire requested I transcribe the journal entries she wrote during her experience in the infected town 4 months ago and post them here, as she is no longer able to do so herself. Hopefully they elucidate her findings and complete this story. To be clear, these entries pick up directly after she stopped posting. My own explanation of the events and why these entries are so delayed will be posted in due course. Clayton, the Voyager. Written on the cover of the journal. Clayton, they deserve to know. Post these entries when you get the chance and tell them what you told me. Don't leave anything out. It's my last request. You owe me. Thanks. See you on the other side. April 12th, 2014. No more electronics. Sorry. My phone charger cable is rotted through. Plastic withered I can't read. Plastic withered away. Wires fried. I found it like that. Just woke up and it was like that. So my phone is dead and my laptop is all fucked up. This whole room feels like it's rotting. I feel like I'm rotting. Just withering up to die. I look at my hands and legs and they look normal. Like nothing's changed. It's from the inside out. I feel crawling inside me. More than skin deep. Like a trillion little parasites wiggling through my muscles, my bone. I look close at my fingers and see along the nail beds the brown edges of decay and 1,000 cigarettes. The Voyager, his real name, is Clayton. That fucker took Elizabeth Hadwell's laptop. He said it would be more useful to him than to me. He said he could maybe fix this. I'm waiting for him to come back. A note from Clayton. I used the alias Voyager when I first started my correspondence with Claire, not wanting to reveal my identity. It is a remnant from my gaming days, and part of my email address. It was also a nickname from high school, what Alan and Lisa called me, later picked up by Jessica and Elizabeth. Time seems scattered. Of course, I can't remember chunks of it, and I'm not sure how events are spaced or which one came after the others, so I'll start with what I know came first. Clayton and I talked a lot after his email. Texts, calls. I really had to be sure, or as sure as possible, that he wasn't trying to fuck us over. He said again and again he wanted to help, to stop this, that he'd do whatever possible. He said he knew Elizabeth, Jess, Lisa, Alan, Alex, all of them. He promised to tell me his story when we met in person. He didn't. I think it's clear Clayton is a liar, but he might be the only person who can end this. He said he could crack the password on the laptop and give me answers. So we met up with him, me, Blake, and Heather. He told us to meet him on the bridge into town. We showed up and waited a half an hour. Nothing. It started to get dark, I think. Then something started shuffling under the bridge, like scraping and moving around. We could hear it making its way closer. Heather freaked out and wanted to leave, but I refused. I was getting desperate. I already knew I was fucked, and I already knew a way out of this. I was going to listen. The shuffling turned out to be Clayton, who was climbing up from his under-bridge encampment. I recognized his leather jacket immediately. He'd been with that girl in the dress when we'd driven through the town the very first time. He'd run and hidden from us. He was an average guy. There was nothing about his physical appearance to suggest someone special. Young, about my age, tall with dark hair and a scraggly beard. He was filthy, though, dirt-encrusted, and he stunk, like he'd been homeless for months. The voice I heard on the phone had been refined, precise in diction. So this surprised me. He clambered over the railing on the other end of the bridge from us and brushed himself off. Not sure what exactly happened next. He didn't even say a word to us. I called his name and he nodded, keeping his distance, and flicked on a flashlight. He shone it on each of us in turn. Then he staggered back, really fast, clearly panicked. I turned around in case something was approaching us from behind, but I only saw Blake and Heather, who seemed just as confused as I was. Clayton started screaming at us, stuff like, "What the fuck? What the hell are you doing? Get the fuck away. Oh my... Don't even look at me. Run away, fucking monster. You fucking monster." Really disjointed. Situationally inappropriate. Sounded like the ramblings of a demented brain, to be honest. I realized at that point that he was insane. Then he pulled out a gun. A black pistol. Took it from his waistband and pointed it right at us. Now Heather started screaming, and Clayton's yells rose to match. Then Blake started too, pushing us behind him. I couldn't figure out what the fuck was happening. Fucking chaos. Blake took a couple of steps towards the guy. I don't know why. Fucking idiot. The gun went off. Blake dropped to the ground. Clayton took off towards the town. The bullet went through Blake's right shoulder and grazed Heather's left ear. We were screaming even louder now, trying to stop the bleeding. I dropped next to Blake and put my hands against the wound like I'd seen in the movies. Compression, right? I don't know how, but we ended up getting him in the car. Heather was bleeding and crying, but she drove as I sat with him in the back, still pressing my hands against his shoulder. He was really pale and in a lot of pain. He was really pale and in a lot of pain. We drove him to the hospital immediately. It was only when we were halfway that I realized I'd dropped the laptop on the bridge. No fucking way I was going back for it, though. On top of mold and monsters and infection, we had a gun-toting manic to deal with, too. It might even have been broken when it fell from my hands. There were no answers on it worth the risk, even if I could assess them. We asked the doctors to quarantine Blake, explaining he had an infectious disease. I don't know if they did or not. He was unconscious when we left. I hated leaving him, but Heather brought up the point that we were probably doing more damage just by being in a public place. He came back to the motel a few days later, with a bunch of stitches and pain meds. He left before they wanted him to, though. He said he couldn't stay in a place with so many people, especially so many sick people. I'm sure the hospital staff thought we were weird hermit kids. Let them. That's it for now. Can't write anymore, my hand hurts. I'm so tired. A note from Clayton. Any and all additions/changes to Claire's journals made by me will be in these brackets and bolded to avoid confusion. April 13th, 2014. Assuming it's the next day. Could be any number of days, weeks even. Just woke up. Might as well continue the saga even though I'm doubting more and more whether anyone will read it. The worst thing about this self-imprisonment is the boredom. You don't realize how much of your time is spent on the computer or your phone until you're forced to give them up. Hours pass in silence, confined to a hotel room. Blake is sleeping off the last of his pain meds. Heather is sitting silent by the window. None of us feel like talking. So I write. Maybe I'll make sense of it all. And the good thing is, if I black out, my words will be harder to delete. The night after Blake returned from the hospital, my phone was still working, and Clayton texted me a rather inscrutable phrase. Clayton. There's a fox in the henhouse. Oh my... Even though I knew I might regret it, I texted him back. Since I don't have my phone and I never wrote down the conversation, this won't be word for word, but I'll transcribe it here to the best of my ability. Remember. Clayton here. Claire's account of our conversation scribbled in her journal was only partially accurate. Here's the exact conversation that took place between us, transcribed from my own text logs. They are word for word, I assure you. There is, after all, no reason for me to lie to you, and I don't intend to. Clayton, 1:03 a.m. There's a fox in the henhouse. Claire, 1:14 a.m. What the hell, man? You shot Blake. Leave us the fuck alone. Clayton, 1:15 a.m. I didn't mean to hurt your friend. Clayton, 1:15 a.m. I'm sorry. Claire, 1:18 a.m. Fuck you! What the hell are you trying to do waving a gun around? You're as fucking crazy as the rest of them. At this point, I became wary of who may be on the other end of the conversation. The entity and Liz have been known to be tricky and manipulative with their use of cell phone messaging, and the misspelling of fuck unnerved me. As far as I knew, Claire may not have been the one texting me. I stopped replying. As a side note, I believe the reason for the misspelling using the keyboards is due to the loss of motor function in the infected. As the virus rages through the human body, not only do the muscles degrade, but the flesh in the digits of the hands and feet become fused. This makes it extremely difficult for those possessed by the entity to type or text. Claire, 1:27 a.m. I bet you're a cultist, too. I bet you're working for that cunt Elizabeth Hadwell. This text gave me a pause. I came to know Liz quite well a few years before all this occurred. Alan was a mutual friend, and she would never call herself a cunt. Elizabeth Hadwell is one of the most self-involved, self-impressed people I have ever met. And even if she was trying to trick me, she would not insult herself. Neither would the entity. If, in fact, they are separate consciousnesses. They love themselves and each other above all. So I replied, Clayton, 1:34 a.m. I am not a cultist, and I would never work for Elizabeth. Are you alone? I need to call you. You need to know something. Claire never responded. I'll let her explain the rest in her own words. At this point, my phone died, so I don't know if he called me. I think I blacked out shortly after because the next thing I remember I was waking up in bed and my phone cord was disintegrated. That marked the beginning of my time with no technology. I wonder what he was going to tell me. The next few entries decreased severely in clarity. It seems Claire was suffering from some kind of mental break. Lines indicate page breaks. April 14th or 15th or 20th. April showers bring May flowers. Have that song stuck in my head. Heather won't stop singing it. I want to hit her. I want to fucking kill her. I wish she'd go ahead and do something fucked up so I could get revenge. But she just sits at the window, just sits and hums and smiles. I try to remind myself she's just a victim in this, like Blake and I. But it does no good, because thoughts like that lead to guilt, and bringing her into this, and then I just get angry again. I'm angry all the time now, or I'm tired. Blake, I love you. I wish you never met her. I think there's something burrowing under my scalp. Next time. Head hurts so fucking bad, but it was a good day. Blake told a good joke today. What did Fuck, I can't remember. April, March, May, whatever. Bad day. Head hurts. Don't know how long I was out. Can hardly write. Even candles are too bright. Walked into Blake's room earlier to find him and Heather having sex. Heather on top. She looked at me with glazed eyes. Reached out to me like she was asking me to join them. But then she blinked and her face twisted into a snarl. She screamed at me to get out. Blake's face was also blank. His eyes were distant, and he just laid there limply. Didn't even notice me. I turned and left. I was really angry, but I don't remember anything else. How can you fuck in a time like this? How can they even muster up the energy? Maybe it was just a dream. I don't remember the last time I ate. I'm not hungry. Fuck you, 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 fuck. Heather has been sleeping all day. She drank a lot last night, but there's still color in her cheeks. The idea that we might be getting better keeps running through my head. How could we be, though? Blake and I went for a walk around sunset. I think his shoulder's infected, like the rest of him isn't, with something far worse. We thought about going to the hospital again, but when we checked the car, we found the engine torn to fucking pieces. I don't know cars, but Blake says a bunch of important wires were cut or ripped out, and we found a spark plug in the parking lot. Besides, we probably shouldn't be around anyone else. The motel seems abandoned. We went inside the reception area today for the first time in a long time. No one there. Smell of earth and decay, mold in the corners. Like I needed more fuel for my guilty conscience. Spent the rest of the day rereading the Hadwell Bible, but I haven't found any more answers. A piece of paper from the Bible was torn out and taped here, as though it contained what Claire thought might be important information. Page 108, verse 3. When it saw the cruelty of its kin, our entity felt shame for his disregard of humanity, and so let it be known that our race is holy, and that we are chosen. For without man's presence, our entity would not have crossed into this realm and blessed the world with its light. And without man, the entity would not linger in this hostile realm. As we are valued by our Almighty, so must we value ourselves. And the church of the entity is the most holy. We are the bringers of a new era. Let its light bless the world. Let all men ascend. Well, that's fucking sexist. Next day. I haven't blacked out in 24 hours. I don't know if this excites or scares me. Heather and Blake report the same thing. Last night, for the first time in a long time, I went to bed myself, instead of simply blacking out and waking up there. I fell asleep easily around 2 a.m. after taking a much-needed shower. I'm starting to hope. Never mind. Can't jinx it. I woke up from a dead sleep around 4 to the sound of the door to my room creaking open. Light from the street lamp outside spilled through the crack. I felt real fear again, that cold rush all over my body. I haven't felt so acutely since escaping that creature in the tunnel. It felt good, in a way. I felt more alive. The door widened. I thought at first that it was Heather, vaguely feminine, short hair, wearing a dress. But as I blinked and the person lurched into the room, I realized it was far too thin to be her. Unnaturally thin. Skin and bones. The light from outside gave me a clear view as she pushed the door wide. A stiff, old navy blue maid's outfit hung off the tiny bone frame. White, withered skin, mostly bald head, with a few clumps of tangled black hair. The eyes looked swollen shut, but the flesh around them wasn't bruised. Smile forced wide to the point of straining. Her head was twisted to an impossible anger, her ear close to her collarbone, like her face was almost upside down. She was missing her left arm at the shoulder, but her uniform hid any wound that might have been there. Her left foot was bare and looked twisted. Reminded me of the gruesome results of foot binding. I fell out of bed as I jerked away from her. I might have screamed. I don't know. She just tilted her head to the side and smiled at me. She tracked my movements easily, like she could see out of her sightless eyes. I grabbed my crowbar, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I didn't want to hurt her. She was almost certainly an innocent in this. Someone I'd cursed to this fate by my motel choice. And my choice to explore the town in the first place. And my choice to fucking stick around. So many bad choices. I deserve this. The thing in the doorway, what used to be a housekeeper, was now something else. Opened her arms to me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she dropped to her hands and sprung. She used her withered hands and feet to move, like an animal, much quicker than I expected from her. She was on me in a minute, her grinning face inches from mine. I noticed then how silent she was. Not a growl or a whine, just short, shallow breathing through her teeth, extremely accelerated. Her hand, the skin of it partly fused, forced itself between my lips into my mouth, as deep as it could go, making me gag. It tasted like mold. I still can't get the taste out of my mouth. She would have reached down my throat if I had let her. I couldn't breathe. I hit her then, with the crowbar. It connected solidly with the side of her head, and she went sprawling away. She still did not make a sound. There was no sound, but the crunch of her skull. I heaved, then drew in a gulp of air and stood up. I went nuts. I couldn't see past the rage. No rational thought, just anger. I stood over her and brought blow upon blow against her skull. I smashed her teeth and dug the sharp crowbar between her eyes. There was no blood. The skin just parted like the flesh of a drained corpse. When I burst open her belly, thick, black liquid oozed out. I need to throw up. Anyway, the short and long of it is I killed her. I fucking killed her. We buried the body in the woods. This page is stained with drops of water, as though she was crying when she wrote this. Claire had a lot of empathy for those things. This is not something I feel or understand. Don't know when. I was in town this morning. Don't know how I got there, but I was in a house, standing facing a corner. It was a long walk back to the motel. This is when I followed Claire. Back to where they were staying. I saw her wandering through the streets of town, completely out of it. She was talking to herself, as they will sometimes when they can still talk. I knew then, as I'd long suspected, that she was beyond help. Yet when she gained consciousness and left town, I also realized she was something still lucid enough to want answers, and smart enough to stay close, not to carry the infection any further. You must understand, I did want to help her. I wish I could. I liked the girl immensely, brave and stubborn as she was. It was just that I had no way of doing so. The next page is filled with rough sketch of a floor plan, clearly drawn by Claire. It only took me a few seconds to recognize it. I used to hang out there almost every day. It's Alan's apartment, the one he shared with Liza. I took a picture. I must say, those question marks intrigued me. Was Claire onto something? Is there something of importance behind that wall? I love something I've never seen, could never have. I know what it is to love something I hate. I know what it is to love my warden. Please, please don't stop. Keep going. No way back. End this. Take me. Ascend with me. You promised. You promised. Claire seems to revert back into a muddled or confused state. I believe she is talking about the entity here. A scrap of paper is once again pasted into the journal. I recognize it from my own notes, a conglomerate pieced together from a wide variety of sources. Everything I knew or had learned or even simply guessed about the entity and its infection. The file into which the notes were gathered was stolen from my camp shortly before I assumed Claire wrote this. Clearly Elizabeth or one of her puppets took it and brought it back to the motel. It could have been Claire herself in a fugue state. Claire seems to at least vaguely understand the significance of this passage, and part of her still conscious mind must have wanted to remember. Or perhaps this was the only portion of the file she could salvage. I have no doubt the rest was destroyed. Now everything the world knows about this comes down to what's in my head, and what's on this website. Anyway, here's the scrap she had. It's not written by me, but a group of scientists that had been living in the town during the outbreak. They'd studied samples of the mold collected by the police, and even had a live victim of the infection at one point. I wish I could have helped them further. They're all gone now. Stage 3. Characterized by memory loss and ataxia. Apparent fugue periods lengthen. Moments of clarity still persist. Speech and motion is clumsy. Occasional numbness in extremities. Muscles seize in the face, resulting in a perpetual smile. Extreme sensitivity to light. Hair loss. Degeneration of the body. No appetite. Very little activity in the cerebral cortex. This has been the longest stage. To date, the patient has spent 18 days like this. I'm going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. 1 minute, I'm so happy I could scream. The next, I'm so angry I could kill. Then the despair comes. The despair is the part I hate the most. And so the cycle repeats itself. I love it. I hate it. I love it again. I know logically when I'm conscious that this is part of the infection. It must be. No way I'd love the god or demon or whatever that is fucking destroying my life. But sometimes, when I'm alone, and it's just me and the whispering in my head, I'm filled with this golden, gentle peace, and such devotion, such love. Even when I wake up sometimes and can't move my fingers or wiggle my toes. I can feel blackouts coming sometimes. My vision goes grainy and I get mad. Sometimes all it takes is thinking about it, like now. When Heather started dancing, I started laughing. Then we were all dancing, bared and dancing. I could live like this. I can't live like this. Kill me. Please stop this. Stop whispering. I know you're reading this. Please stop. Come back. I know I asked you to go just now, but I lied. I want you back. Please, you're the only one who understands me, and I can't stand it. I hate you. Fuck. Why? Why is this happening? I remember youth's beaming anguish, waiting for the peace of sweet oblivion, waiting for the peace. Waiting. The voyager is blindly loathsome, half-knowing, helpless. My legs didn't work today. I had to drag myself around on my hands. Heather thought that was funny. I did too. But when Blake started crying, so did I. I've only seen him cry once before. He knelt with me and cried and told me he loved me. Heather got really mad. She was smashing things. We danced again that night. My legs didn't work, so I just braced them against the bed and pushed myself up with my hands. It's been weeks, I'm sure of it, maybe even months. Moments of lucidity are sparse, and when they're here, I'm usually too tired to write. But now I have to get this down. With every mile between Elizabeth and I can feel her immediate hold on me loosening. That doesn't mean I'm cured, though. I still black out. I cannot walk. I think the muscles of my legs have atrophied. My skin is papery and pale. My ribs are jutting. It's hard to hold this pen. Clumps of my hair are falling out. I used the wheelied computer chair to move around once my legs gave out. But it seemed like lucidity was back. Almost like the infection wants me to witness my own degeneration. I found out what Clayton wanted to tell me. It took him long enough to find a way to communicate. Or maybe Elizabeth was preventing him. I don't know. She was indeed preventing me. I left countless notes at Claire's door, multiple photographs. It seemed she was unable to receive any of them, thanks to Elizabeth's vigilance. I've been lucid all day, but I didn't want to talk to anyone, so I just sat in my room, watching the mold creep up the walls. I hadn't seen the others, but I heard them mumbling through the conjoining door between our rooms. Heather was singing something, like usual. She did that a lot. Human contact made me want to puke. It's weird to have this aching desire in me. I wanted something intensely, but I didn't know what it was. And what I don't want is to leave this room. Around evening, just a couple hours ago, there was a sound by the door to the parking lot. A rustling, scraping sound startled. I looked over in time to see a thick manila envelope being pushed through the crack under the door. I quickly wheeled myself over and scooped up the envelope. The singing in the other room stopped abruptly. The front cover said, "Claire, for your eyes only." I recognized the Voyager's spiky handwriting. My hand started shaking as I turned the envelope over and clumsily tried to open it. My hands don't work so well anymore. This appears to be true. Claire's handwriting has become steadily worse over the course of the journal. Some parts are nearly illegible, and others are simply scribbles. I have not transcribed the scribbles, for obvious reasons. It took me a good 5 minutes, sitting in silence, to open that envelope. But when I did, a photograph fell out. Or I should say, 2 pieces of a photograph. It had been torn. The first, the larger bit, was a headshot of 3 people, all smiling. A blonde girl with a nose ring, a familiar-looking man with ashy brown hair and dimples, and Clayton. The photograph was ripped just to the left of his head, omitting someone from the photo. There was writing on the back. I felt a deep sense of dread and turned it over. There was a date at the top, October 2009. Underneath, in order from left to right, were the names of those pictures. Jess, Alan, Clayton, and the picture was torn there. I looked down to where the other scrap had fallen, face down on the floor. My whole body was shaking now. I picked it up and read the name. Liz. I flipped the photo over. I was finally going to look into the face of Elizabeth Hadwell. The vessel. The girl who became one with God and started all this shit. I was about to see what my tormentor looked like. A pretty, smiling face looked at me. Green eyes, short brown hair, red lipstick, an attractive, pleasant face. A face you wanted to keep looking at. But to me, it was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. Not because this girl was deeply evil, not because she was the start of all this. It was because I recognized that face. She was Heather. In the other room, Elizabeth Hadwell, the girl I'd been living with for more than a month, started to sing in a clear, high voice. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Then Blake was screaming. How had I not figured it out? How had I been so blind for so long? In the space of an instant, just as Blake began to scream, all the clues came crashing down on me. So obvious now that the truth was in sight. It had been right in front of me, roaring at me to pay attention, and I ignored it. I'd come to the infected town only once before meeting up with Blake. While there, I explored the apartment building and the police station. This, doubtlessly, was when Elizabeth caught sight of me. She followed me. She followed me all the way to fucking San Francisco. She wormed her way into my life through my best friend Blake, who could never resist gorgeous girls with a touch of bad about them. She gave off this edgy vibe. She seemed fucking cool. She'd orchestrated running into us at that bar and weaseled her way into his bed that night. I hadn't cared, didn't get jealous. Blake and I often slept together whenever we were in the same town. We had a good thing going. Okay. Because I was drunk and distracted by a man with ashy brown hair and dimples. He didn't stick around long, but I know, thanks to that photo, that it was Alan. He was doubtlessly possessed by Elizabeth, used to bait me so she could get closer to Blake. Fuck her. I fucking hate her. I thought Alan escaped at the end of the Chicago series when he jumped out of the fucking hotel window to get away from her. At least that's what she wrote happened. It could have been a lie. Even if he did run from her, she obviously managed to catch up with him. So then Heather became a part of our life. She came with us to the infected town again. She cuddled Blake and joked around with me. I liked her, okay? As much as you can like a girl who's fucking the man you love. She kept up the charade flawlessly. Which I guess isn't all that surprising. I've been told and shown time and time again that Elizabeth is incredibly manipulative. She's a damn good actress, and now she could be anywhere. And the thing is, she knows this. She and her entity have been laughing at me since the beginning. She's even been dropping clues as to who she really is. Remember how H and E were always capitalized in all the messages she sent me? He, H-E, not he. Their initials, Heather Engels, Elizabeth Hadwell, H-E, toying with us. I ask myself this question often. I was being overly cautious, and it ended up fucking them over. I'm so sorry, Claire. I should have told you immediately. I should have helped you get out. I got to the room as quickly as I could when Blake's scream went on and on. Screams of true pain and terror. I dropped to the floor and dragged my useless legs as quickly as I could. Opening the door was the hardest part. It was almost too much of a reach without any leg muscles. But I finally turned the knob and pushed. Blake was on the bed, laying on his back, being pinned down by Heather. Fucking Elizabeth! She knelt over him, her claws digging into his wrists. Her face was close enough that, had he not been yelling, I'd have thought they were about to kiss. As I watched, she opened her mouth, wide. Too wide, far wider than humanly possible. She unhinged her jaw like a fucking snake, and this black something came pouring out. I don't know if it was smoke or liquid or fucking what. It shone like oil and it was just as black, but it floated in the air like smoke, descending too slowly and gracefully into Blake's open mouth. His screams cut out with a gargle when it filled his throat. It was my turn to scream. Elizabeth turned toward me sharply, the oily stuff retracting back into her mouth. It dribbled down her chin when she closed her lips. She looked furious, like something feral and wrong. Her face was too long. It looked distorted, unsymmetrical, like a bad acid trip. Skin around her disjointed jaw hung slack. Her eyes were completely black and huge, much too large for her face. She opened her mouth again to complete, inky darkness. Then the mouth curved into a hideous smile. I screamed again. I believe what Claire saw was the closest anyone has seen to the entity's true form. It hides behind Elizabeth's skin, but apparently it will show itself at times. I don't know what it was doing to Blake, but I believe it was something powerful. Elizabeth slithered off the bed, dragging Blake along with her. She crawled to the center of the room, reminiscent of a spider, then dragged itself upright. She was holding Blake by the scruff of his neck, as easily as you'd pick up a wet towel. He was limp, his eyes rolled back into his head. I thought he was dead. Elizabeth was much taller than I remember her being, though maybe it was just my vantage point from the ground. She seemed to loom towards the ceiling, casting unnatural shadows in the already dim room, and she was smiling at me. She spoke in a voice that I'd never heard before, like 2 or 3 voices at the same time. One was raspy, the other high-pitched as a child, the other, I don't know, different. It didn't sound like it could come from her. It couldn't come from anyone. "What are you gonna do, sweetheart?" it asked me, shaking Blake a little by the neck. He moaned a little, casting hope into my heart. I had no response to give. I had no idea what I would do, but slowly, almost of its own volition, my hand crept over to find a fallen lamp on the floor next to me. The entity, or Elizabeth, or whatever the fuck I was looking at, couldn't see this behind the doorframe. When it spoke next, it was in Heather's voice, or I suppose Elizabeth's voice. "She's not moving, my love," she told herself. "She's not getting the fuck out of our way." They took turns speaking to each other, having this fucked up little conversation, like there were 2 of them there. "It would seem she isn't," It's like she has a death wish. Maybe we should ask her. Fuck. Maybe we should see her investigate. Crawl. Elizabeth finished the entity's sentence with a malicious grin at me. Knowing they were about to move at me, I took my chance and pelted the broken lamp at them. What the fuck ever. It hit her squarely in the face, and she let out a roar of fury. I used her distraction to drag myself under the bed, the only hiding place I could see. Elizabeth shuffled around in that other room for a while, breathing heavily and talking to herself. I caught snippets of a conversation about what they should do with me, what they should do with Blake. "Let's stick to the plan, my love," Elizabeth's voice said. "Yes, darling, yes," the entity responded. "Such a clever girl. A brilliant, beautiful girl." Christ, self-love to the extreme. The way they spoke to each other. I know it's so fucked up since they're the same person, in the same body. But the way they spoke to each other was how lovers speak to each other. I'm really scared about what they're trying to do. I'm really scared about how they want to use Blake. They didn't even come into my room again to look for me, like I was the least of their concerns. I probably was. Not like I could do much anyway. I laid there for eternity, listening to them thump and shuffled and mumbled to themselves. Then finally, the door to the outside opened, and they were gone. I dragged myself back into the room, frantically looking for Blake, but they'd taken him. They'd taken him from me. I broke down in tears. I've been lucid since then. At least, I think I have. It's been about a week, maybe more, the worst week of my life. It seems when Elizabeth isn't around, her hold loosens. Or maybe she just wants my conscience for this torture. This boredom and pain and despair. I don't think I'm getting better. I just think the infection is progressing more slowly. It's still going to consume me. So now I wait for it, alone. I've lost everyone. I can't ask for help. No one could help me, even if I tried. I wish the darkness would just take me, even if I'm going to be tormented for the rest of my life. At least I wouldn't be conscious for it. Blake, I love you so much. I wish you were here. I wish I could help you. More than anything, I wish I could help you. Mold climbs up the walls, over the bed, onto this notebook, onto my hands. I've been laying here so long my legs are taken over with it. It covers them. I'm almost certain it's eating them, converting them into more of its kind. I'm glad they're numb. I think it would hurt. My face feels stiff, and when I touch it I realize I'm smiling, grinning, ear to ear, even as tears roll from my eyes. I smile. I'm not getting out of this, and I'll wait here until the mold grows over the rest of me, or until I lose myself to the infection, until my memories stop and I ascending straight to hell. I welcome it. I long for the peace of sweet oblivion. I embrace it gladly. Wait, what is that? Someone is knocking at the door. Thus ends Claire's journal. I, Clayton, will take up the narrative from here. In the plot, Claire's posts were a useful tool to track Claire and Elizabeth's movement. It allowed me to relay messages and It allowed me to relay messages and sort through patterns. It also imparted knowledge of the entity to a wider audience than I honestly believed possible. Then there was the matter of Claire's last request to me, to transcribe and post her diary here. I fulfilled it, but thought it too dangerous to do much else. The posts are a liability. Elizabeth isn't particularly tech-savvy, but I don't know what information I suppose, would be able to glean from my posting. Even if they simply found clues in a hapless detail I include, they could have come bearing down on me long before I was ready for them. Now, after months of preparation, I am ready. I feel I have enough information and enough weapons. Now, in fact, I feel I'm in a safe place. Things have quieted down, and so I will continue what I started more than half a year ago. Christ, has it really been that long? First off, a promise. I'm going to tell you everything I know, without omission. I feel obligated to respect Claire's wishes to do so, but that isn't the sole reason. I also believe that Elizabeth Hadwell does not want you to know any of this. She'd love for you to fancy her the victim, or even a heroine. She'd love for you to trust her and to question me. You may question me, you have the right, but my second promise is that I will never lie to you. My one goal in this life is to ruin Elizabeth Hadwell and the entity, and I believe I can use the truth to do this. I want to shatter their hold on this earth even further than it had been shattered by Claire's testimony. I want to run their names into the muck, where they belong. I want to destroy them utterly, and as they have destroyed so many others, as they have destroyed me, because they will keep destroying, this is the third promise I make. As long as Elizabeth Hadwell is alive and working with it, they will take and take. They will spread and devour and control, Donic totum implete orbium, until it fills the whole world. And my fourth promise is that I will do everything in my power to stop them. I suppose I should begin by finishing Claire's saga. Then we can move on to the events in the past that led to this. You will hate me when this account is over. I will not begrudge you that. I hate myself. That's the problem with the goddamn greater good. It cares very little for the lives lost along the way. I'd watched from the woods as Elizabeth Hadwell fled the motel with the dark-haired man named Blake slung over her shoulder. He was a big guy, more muscular than average, but she carried him as one might carry an empty backpack. She looked strange, much taller than usual, but she moved so fast I couldn't get a good look. She ran on her hands and feet, like a goddamn cheetah, back towards the town. I followed. A stupid thing to do, given that she was so fast, but I thought perhaps I could catch up with her and stop whatever she was going to do with Blake. Maybe find her hideout while I was at it. I have an old 10-speed bike that I found in an abandoned garage in town, so I jumped on that and pedaled hard. I didn't catch up. I spent a few hours in the town looking around Elizabeth's usual stomping grounds. The apartment, the school, the church, but she'd disappear with Blake. At sunset I left quickly. I did not want to recklessly wander around after dark, attracting the attention of the town's numerous infected meat puppets, or the thing that controlled them. They get more active when the sun goes down, coming out of the various dark basements and holes. They get more aggressive, too, the way mold thrives in the damp and dark. I'd killed 3 of them to date at that point, but it was hard. Visceral work. They are surprisingly resilient and knit themselves back together quickly, and I hated it. So I climbed onto my bike and pedaled back the way I'd come. I only spotted one infected person on my way out of town. It stood on the roof of one of the houses near the bridge. Its back to me, head tilted back like it was staring over the trees at the setting sun. I couldn't tell whether it was a male or female. The head was bald and the body was stick-thin. It wore a tattered gray bathrobe. One of its feet was missing, which made its stance lopsided and clumsy. But I noticed with a jolt that one of its arms ended in a long, jagged white piece of bone. The skin had peeled away to make room for the protrusion, made for stabbing, and it nearly reached the ground, it was so long. As I watched, the creature bent and scrambled down the roof to the opposite side, dropping out of sight. I didn't know if it had spotted me, but I sped across the bridge into the relative safety of the woods as quickly as I could. I felt then that things were changing in the infected town. Things had accelerated over the months when the entity and its vessel were so close by. More and more infected people were coming into a new stage of their ascension. They were evolving, in a way, getting more mobile and more dangerous. I didn't know why. It hadn't been that way before. As in the case of poor Lisa, when this first began, the entity usually drained its victims after taking them. They wasted away into nothing, and their bodies died and molded. Most of the citizens of the town met this fate. But now some of the bodies I encountered there, only some, mind you, were gaining new power. They were still twisted beyond recognition, still grinning toothly. But since Claire had returned with Blake and Elizabeth, I started seeing weird bony hooks or spikes protrude from the ends of the arms. Teeth grew sharp in those smiles, whereas before simply taking a couple steps were slow and clumsy work for them. I'd seen infected people recently who could spring like cats, jump onto roofs, or break down doors. It was rare, yes, but it was fucking scary. Elizabeth and the entity were more dangerous than ever, possibly because they were now fully merged. I headed to a small cabin in the woods where I'd been staying, one of the few safe places left. I planned to bide my time doing some research and stocking up on ammunition for my 2 guns, which would require a voyage into Portland. Cities are safer, larger, and I was more likely to find the items I needed for defense. Due in part to my road trip, nearly a week passed before I returned to the town, but when I did, I noticed something that actually gave me hope. It was quiet there. The feeling of being watched upon crossing the bridge was still present, had lessened in a palpable way. I knew in my gut, as I somehow knew many things about the entity, that Elizabeth was many miles away. They had once again left infected town to its own devices, and their influence had decreased considerably. I headed back for the motel, wondering if Claire would still be there, wondering even if I could possibly still help her. My job, my fucking calling, you could say, is not, and has never been, to help the victims of the entity. Usually that desire was suppressed in me by a force far beyond my control. Other goals were far too important. But in Claire's case, I couldn't stop myself. I had to see what I could do for her. This is the part I dreaded telling you. In the interest of full disclosure, I suppose I should simply get it down and post this and have done with it. Claire's journal ends with the words, "Someone is knocking at the door." That someone was me. When I entered the motel room, I saw immediately how far gone Claire was. In her journal, she rarely described her physical appearance. Indeed, all the mirrors in the room were cracked or stained with mold. I would not want to look at myself either, if such an awful thing was happening to me. I've seen many people touched by the entity, what you call mold creatures. I've seen twisted backs and elongated arms, white skin and fused teeth, but this was worse by far than any of them. Claire had, for some reason I do not fully understand, been made to suffer. The details were almost particular, as if bestowed especially to cause pain and horror. She lay on the ground by the door, having dragged herself towards it when I knocked, but unable to stand. Her hair was mostly gone, just a few thin white strands. She'd been a small girl to begin with, barely 5 foot, and now she was severely emaciated. Her ribs and collarbones stretching the thin skin on her torso so obscenely it was a wonder they didn't tear it. Her legs, or what was left of them, sprawled useless under her, but they were no longer recognizable as legs. They had been taken by the contagion as it finally broke through her skin from the inside, fusing her legs together and turning them into a black, shapeless, ragingly infectious lump. I'd only seen this amount of decay before in creatures that were already dead. It stopped me there in the doorway, utterly still with shock and sadness. Claire. Jesus. It must have hurt like hell. I've never met a person braver than that woman. The black rot stopped at her waist, and her torso rose from the ruins. Draped in a shirt that was 5 sizes too big, her hands, pale and thin, gripped a pen and a notebook. She looked at me, and something like relief filled her eyes. Her face was the worst part. Claire had been a pretty girl, with elfish features and large green eyes. Those eyes had arrested me when we first met. I think of them often. Now her face was destroyed. Elizabeth had made sure of that. Her skin stretched waxy and tight across jutting cheekbones and eye sockets, veins popping from her temples, and yellow bruises forming around the forced tissue near her mouth. Her lips stretched into the classic, permanent grimace, too wide for her face. One eye was swollen shut, the lids beginning to fuse, but the other was wide open, so sunken into its socket I wasn't sure at first that it could see. But it could, and that was something I'd never seen in an affected person. Every other time, the infected went blind completely. But Elizabeth, in her jealousy and spite, had made sure this girl still had a window to the outside world, to watch and wait as she was slowly consumed from the inside. It spoke of hatred I hadn't thought even Liz was capable of. I sat on the ground with Claire for a long time, and we talked. She could still move her jaw enough to speak in slurred and jolting sentences. There was no rush and nothing else to do. Claire, incorrigible as ever, wanted to know everything, and I told her the whole goddamn story. Everything I knew, even my wild conjectures. She listened silently, and at the end we shared theories. I'm sure I'll include most of them as this tale continues. Then she asked me for a favor, and it broke me down to tears. But I agreed, and left for a few minutes to gather some supplies from my truck. When I came back, she handed me her journal with her handwritten note on the cover, including her username and password. She stressed how important it was that you all knew. I took her journal and leaned down to kiss her. Just once, on the forehead. She hadn't deserved any of this. I usually let my mild sociopathy dull the sympathy, but for most of the infected people, but she broke right through. I will never forget her. Her one good eye slowly closed, seemingly of its own accord, and she sighed in acceptance as I watched the skin swell and the lids began to stitch themselves together into one shiny, smooth stretch of flesh. She asked me to do it. She was ready. So ready. She did not want to let it use her any more than it already had. So I stood. I backed up a few paces and raised the item I've grabbed from my car. I aimed directly at her head so that the metal slugs would destroy her quickly and painlessly. I told her I was sorry and that she deserved far better than this. She replied that I was doing her the greatest kindness she could imagine. It didn't feel that way. It still doesn't. Then I pulled the shotgun's trigger. I knew at once there was no way she could come back from it, even with an increased regeneration. Chunks of skull flew in all directions. Black ichor splattered my shoes. Her headless body slumped to the floor, still twitching. I covered what I could in my leather jacket, a makeshift funeral shroud, and the best I could do as a token of respect. Then I went back to my truck and grabbed the gas cans. The mold doesn't catch fire easily, but with enough effort I managed to burn the motel to the ground. As the shadows recede and the echoes of terror fade into the night, we must bid farewell to another haunting tale. But fear not, dear listeners, for the darkness will always welcome us back, eager to share its secrets once more. Remember to keep a light burning in the darkness, for even the smallest flame can hold back the night. Until next time, may your dreams be free from whispers of the dark, and may you find solace in the light of day. This has been Shadows in the Dark Tales of Terror. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. Until we meet again, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never forget that the shadows are always watching.